Hey up, it's your Grandad Goose Kitchen here, making tape number 2 for the grandkids, Joe, Thomas, Nell, Ellie, Annie and Hannibal. And today we're reaching the 1960s, which was after the 1950s, which we did yesterday. And yeah, we're going to talk about how it was growing up in a place called Yeadon and experiencing the 1960s in my family, and from that perspective, looking out on, it's called the swinging 60s. All sorts was happening in the 1960s, except in Yeadon. Nothing happened in Yeadon much, and it was very much the same as the 1950s. And some people would argue much the same as the 1940s and 1930s, and not a whole lot different from the 1920s. There's a lot of truth in that. It's an exaggeration. Of course it's an exaggeration, but there's a lot of truth in it. See, what you have to understand at this point, things have not always been like what they are now. In the 1960s, it all started to change. It took a while to get to Yeadon. About 1990 or something. But yeah, things started to change in the 1960s. So people like me and Arnie, my brother, and Ari, and my brother, were growing up in a very different world from my mum and dad, who had been born in 1920 and 1926. And it was a bit of a clash, Anyway, we've got to talk about Yeadon first. What was Yeadon like? Yeadon is a mill town, a woolen textile mill town in what was called the West Riding of Yorkshire. It's in between Leeds and Bradford. You see those two balls hanging from the ceiling? That'd be Leeds, that'd be Bradford, and just about here would be Yeadon. 8 miles from Leeds, 6 miles from Bradford. We were in between. And I'm going from memory now, but it was about 10 mills in the town. Now, the population was only about 12,000 people. And those 10 woolen textile mills employed at least one-third of all, well, it employed a third of all men. That's just full stop, stop there. That's directly. It's not in jobs to do with the mills, it's actually being physically inside the mills, on the machines and so on. And a large number of women, some working part-time, also worked in the mills. So maybe, a few thousand more. Essentially, something approaching, I don't know, certainly a third of the whole town, between a third and a half of the whole town, worked in one industry. And of course, different mills did different things. My dad's mill was called a finisher. He was a finisher, which means, guess what? They finished off the product. And at the end of finishing was a part where they dyed the wool, yeah? And it's called the wet end. And my dad worked in the wet end, and it was wet. I used to take his lunch up to him some days when he'd forgotten it. We didn't call it lunch in those days. And I'd walk in. It was filthy. It was stinking. There was water running down the walls. There was exposed electrical cables. And he worked there from 6:30 each morning until 5 in the evening. And he did that from age 14 to age 55. And he only got 2 weeks off a year. Yeah, quite a job. So you have to imagine him trying to understand what all the swinging... It cracks me up thinking about it. You have to understand how somebody like him viewed the swinging 60s, I mean, maybe you don't get it, but it's like a Martian walking into Morrison's, it's just, people like him they really struggle to understand pop culture and the idea that young people had money and wanted to go out and enjoy themselves. This was total novelty. Anyway, my mum did all kinds of jobs to begin with. She worked in a place called Crompton Parkinson's during the war. That was an electrical factory. And then, as a young woman, she worked at Billy Meggs, that's William Murgatroyd's mill on Harrogate Road, which is now a fish shop, interestingly enough. And she worked there part-time. And then later in the 1960s, she was a cleaner in the doctor's surgery. And the two doctors she worked for were alcoholics. And some days they'd shout out, "Kathleen, lock the door, lock the buggers out." And they'd get the bottle, they were referring to the patients, obviously, and they'd get the bottles of whiskey out and get pissed drunk. I mean, very drunk even, yeah. And my mum would feel embarrassed because all the patients were waiting in the waiting room, and the doctors were getting very drunk, which happened quite a few times, and one of them fell off a cliff and died when he was very drunk. But that was kind of later on, though, and his house was burning down at the time. Okay, that's not very nice, is it? Let's move on. Okay, now what I want you to get is, see, my mum was more open to the idea of swinging 60s. She was a big fan of a guy called Mick Jagger from the Rolling Stones, and you know, she was quite keen on him. But what you have to imagine is these two people, you know, Mum had got married at 9. She left school, she pulled out of school. The head teacher at Herber Grammar School said keep her in school. She'll get to Oxford or Cambridge. But no, she got pulled out at age 14 and put to work at Crompton Parkinson's. So this woman was a highly intelligent woman, but by age 18, you know, age 19, she was married and had children. And there's no wrong in that, but it was very tough having kids in those days because, you know, all it was done, you know, it wasn't carpet, it wasn't vacuum cleaners, or, well, I won't go on about it. We did washing in the bath and stuff, you know. Anyway, so you had her, who was highly intelligent, highly capable, and my dad, who during the war had been what's called a conscientious objector. We'll come to that another time, yeah? He was also much the same, you know, really, really smart people. And it came home to me one time. We used to do a lot of talking at the table, at the dining table. It wasn't normal talk, but this one time Ian brought his future wife to come and meet the family, and they all she sat at the table, and we forgot to change our behaviour, because what we used to do at meal times was attack each other verbally. It wasn't too, well, it was a bit personal sometimes. It was about politics and history and economics and philosophy and all kinds of bizarre stuff. And the arguments at meal tables used to get very heated, and chairs would get kicked over. And this one particular time, when Pat, Ian's future wife, came to visit, she thought we all were hating each other and a fight was about to break out. Now, the reason I mention that is that, you know, I haven't changed much, and I'm a bit combative, you know, when it comes to discussions. But it was how we communicated. We didn't talk about small, uninteresting things. We weren't interested in TV. It was books, music, politics, economics, philosophy. My dad was a member of the Communist Party. My mum was a socialist. You know, that's not my politics anymore, but that's how they were. Anyway, we're getting towards. I'm not supposed to go on for more than 15 minutes, but these two people were very frustrated in their lives. You know, enormous abilities, but one of them was working 50-hour, 60-hour weeks in a mill, and the other one was washing floors at the doctor's, cleaning toilets out. And what happened in the 1960s, their life changed dramatically. I think everybody has to try and make the most of their potential, and extraordinary things happened for both my dad in his own way, and for my mum. For my mum, it's extraordinary what happened, you know, it's incredible. Yeah, I'll start off with my dad. My dad was somebody who liked money. He was very fond of money, and he was a tight bugger. It's technically known as being a tight bugger. You know, he was very, very tight with money, and there's no argument about that. I didn't know what money was until I was about 20 years old. I'm joking now, but it was a bit like that, yeah? And he was obsessed about not spending money, which is one reason why maybe my brother Ian and me turned out the opposite way. He would tell the story of Micawber. Micawber was one of his Dickens characters. And Micawber was always, he was in debtor's jail. He always spent more than he had. And consequently, he was always in debt. And my dad used to, there was a famous quote, and I'm sure I'm getting it wrong. He'd say, David, that's me. Well, he called me Daft Bugger, but I'll come to that in a moment. He'd say, Daft Bugger, I'll tell you something. Annual income, 20 guineas. Don't worry about guineas, it's like pounds, but a bit more. Annual income, 20 guineas. Average annual expenditure, 21 guineas. Result, misery. Annual income, 20 guineas. Annual expenditure, 20 guineas, or a bit less. Result, happiness. And my poor dad believed that would make an impression on me, and I'd become careful with money and sensible. And it was a total failure, as your mothers will tell you. I won't go into it, but we'll tell you, okay. My dad, he worked 6:30 till 5 in the mill. That was 5 days a week. He often did Saturday mornings as well. On top of that, he was a street trader. Now, I've just been downtown selling Union Jacks. It's the Queen's Platinum Jubilee in a week or two's time. And I've got a few hundred of these flags. And I've been selling them at 50p each. Now, that's odd, because I grew up doing that. From age 4 onwards, I stood next to my dad down Darley Street in Bradford, which I'm not sure it's still there anymore. And we sold Union Jacks, balloons, windmills, rubber ducks, a thing called returning balls, where it was an elastic string and a ball. I was very good at that. And we'd stand there and we'd make money all day. And sometimes we'd dress up as Santa Claus if it was Christmas and pretend we're giving out presents for 10p each. And sometimes we do other stuff. But every Saturday morning during the winter, we're down there. And every weekend, Saturday and Sunday in the summer, we'd be out at the carnival. We call them galas in Yorkshire, galas, carnival, street processions, royal visits, any kind of event. We'd be out selling Union Jacks. 10p Union Jacks, 10p Union Jacks. We'd buy them for a penny each and sell them for 10p. And we'd sell 5 gross in a day, if it was a Queen's visit. And that was more than I could earn all week, quite a lot more. Anyway, from 4 years old onwards, I spent Saturday mornings hanging on to my dad. And as I got older, he used to have a box hung around his neck. And as he got older, he made a box for me. So, you know, here's my dad, and here's me with my little box. And I was nervous about it. I used to stammer in those days. You'd be astonished, wouldn't you? But I had a speech impediment. But I used to stammer and stutter and lisp and do all sorts in those days. But standing there and shouting at the crowd, you know, returning balls, 10p, returning balls. You know, I got over the stammer and I became a wonderful speaker overnight almost. Anyway, so Dad did that. He also did Punch and Judy. That was Saturday afternoons and Sundays during the winter. And every weekend I'd go off with him. And my job was to sit inside the Punch and Judy booth next to my dad and hand him the puppets. So it was quite a strange way of growing up inside a Punch and Judy booth. You know, handing my dad, Mr. Punch, Judy, you know, the clown, the judge, the crocodile, and so on. Yeah, but I kind of watched him kind of entertaining. It was children's parties and working men's clubs and so on. And it's called a patter. It's a way of talking. It's like a kind of a script you go through, but you try and give the impression it's spontaneous. I'm doing a patter now. it gives the impression about being spontaneous, yeah? Anyway, I didn't get very much done in the 1960s, and time's up now, it's 15 minutes. Doesn't time fly when you're having fun? I'll go on about Arnie and Arian next time, but I'll play a song. What I remember... I remember being about, it'd be 1968, and our Neil was trying to play the guitar. He would have been, 18 years old, yeah? The wrong way around. And I remember sitting opposite him, and he was crap at the guitar, totally crap. But I remember our Neil sat playing this song on the guitar. When people say 1960s, guess what I think of? I think of this guy Donovan. Oh, he's gone now. Bye, Donovan. I think of Donovan singing Hurdy-Gurdy Man. Yeah. What songs are going to remind you of when you were kids, when you grow up? I don't know. Think about it. Anyway, so that was tape number 2. We still we haven't got very far through the 1960s. Tomorrow we'll do the 1960s again because it's so much fun, isn't it? Really, yeah. And maybe the day after as well. Who cares? We can go on all year doing this, can't we? All right, I hope you're enjoying these tapes, and I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye now. Bye. Bye. Watch, I can balance these balls with my fingers. Oh, it's difficult. Not everyone can do that. All right, bye now. Bye.